I will hand this over to Robert Miller of Avid, and thanks again for coming. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. Is everyone having a great show? All right. So actually, we're really very honored this evening to have this wonderful panel here, and I'm going to do a brief introduction of each of them. Although I'm sure that you all know their work, and actually Michelle has been spinning their work here for the last hour or so. But here, in no particular order, we have Frank Filipetti and Mr.
That was the right order.
That was the right order?
Yeah, that was the right order.
Frank Filipetti, actually Joel Singer from Music Mix Mobile, Kevin Killen, and Niko Bolas. So I'm going to just give you a brief little bio about each one of these guys, although you probably all know all about their work. So Frank Filipetti is a music producer, engineer, and mixer. He was one of the first audio professionals to embrace digital. His credits include mixes for such #1 singles as Foreigners, I Want to Know What Love Is, and I Don't Want to Live Without You, which he also produced. The 1983 Kiss album, Lick It Up, and the Bangles song, Eternal Flame. Filipetti engineered and produced Survivor's 1988 album, Too Hot to Sleep. He has worked with Carly Simon, Barbra Streisand, Vanessa Williams, George Michael, 10,000 Maniacs, Lauren Cahan, and James Taylor, whose Elegant Hourglass Filipetti produced. Engineered and mixed and winning Grammy Awards in 1998 for the Best Engineered Album and the Best Pop Album. Frank is currently mixing Andrea Bocelli's Central Park concert that was recorded by Music Mix Mobile, which is Joel's company. And Niko Bolas, Niko is known as a vibe-oriented producer and engineer in music studios and in forays with high-tech companies. He has recorded and produced music technology since starting at the famous Record One studio in 1979. He has worked with artists such as Neil Young, Billy Joel, Rod Stewart, Don Henley, John Mayer, Melissa Ethridge, and Stan Getz. So Joel Singer. Joel is one of the principal partners of Music Mix Mobile, M3, the country's largest remote facilities company. And Joel designs and all the technical systems for the mobile facilities and fixed studio installations. Their flagship facility, Eclipse, houses 2 Pro Tools 176-track recording systems and one 192 I/O D-Control mixing system. This truck is used for large-scale and broadcast shows and recordings, and their other trucks and studios house multiple D-Control and D-Command and C24 systems. Recent and notable projects include, for Joel include the 53rd Grammy Awards, 2011 Country Music Awards, the 2011 Country Music Festival, the 2011 Rock Hall inductions, Lady Gaga for HBO, A Decade of Difference, a birthday party for President Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, iHeartRadio, Andrea Bocelli in Century Park with Frank Filipetti, and PBS's performance in performance at the White House for the upcoming Time Machine DVD and CD release for Rush. Joel is also the recipient of a Grammy Award and multiple Emmy and Mix Tech Awards. And also, last but not least, of course, is Kevin Killen, who has spent the last 30 years compiling an impressive list of credentials, including working with U2, The Unforgettable Fire, Peter Gabriel on So, Elvis Costello on Spike, Tori Amos on Under the Pink, Dave Matthews Band on the Central Park concert, and Sugarland on Love on the Inside. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us this evening. I'm just going to really and of course, we have I think most of the folks here have been at the show, and there's a lot of new stuff, and actually none of these guys have had a chance to use it yet because we were so secret, about the whole thing. But any case, they've been using Pro Tools for, all many years, and I want to kind of ask them basically, to just give us a little bit of experience about, some of your recent projects, and maybe how you kind of got into using this, and how Pro Tools has helped your workflow, and kind of let you go at that, and we'll pick it up as we go on down the line. So, Frank, why don't you start? And Frank and Joel maybe start about your recent project here with Andrea Bocelli in Central Park. Yeah.
All right. Well, we. I got a call in March or April about doing recording Andrea Bocelli. A lot of low end on this mic, huh? Can we get some of that isotope stuff on here?
It's your mic technique. That's
Yeah,
the
is it?
problem.
That's the problem, yeah.
Well, I'm always better on the other side of this, so it's much easier to say to someone, do that again, than it is to actually be behind the mic. But anyway, I got a call to do Andrea Bocelli in Central Park, which was going to be a pretty massive undertaking. It was going to be with the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, doing opera and classical songs, as well as Celine Dion, Tony Bennett, Chris Bodie, and a bunch of other soloists who would be going with Bocelli. So it's a combination of classical, neoclassical, opera, and pop material. David Foster was also on board, and I figured a project of that magnitude, they asked, who would you have record this? And I didn't blink an eye. I would say the M3 was my first and really only choice. Not that there aren't other people that are good at it, but just in working with them over the years, their particular abilities in the digital arena was just, from my perspective, as good as it gets. One of the issues that made the M3 truck, which Joel is involved with, a must, is the fact that the New York Park Conservancy wouldn't allow us to put the truck near the stage. We had to be approximately a quarter of a mile from the stage. So you can imagine running 160 microphones down a quarter of a mile in some analog world. That would be pretty ridiculous. But because of the M3 Mobile and the setup that they have, we were able to have all of our A to D converters and preamps on stage. We then converted everything to MADI. It then went fiber optic the quarter mile to our truck. So we pretty much got exactly what was being converted on stage into the truck. Allowed us to get a sound that was remarkably true and similar to what we would have gotten had we been parked right next to the event. And it really made the difference for me in what we were able to get. At the same time, having all those microphones and so forth on stage really required the ability of the rigs and the Pro Tools system that they had on there. What did we run? 3 systems?
Yeah, we have 2 recorders on the big truck, on all our trucks, a master and a safety recorder, each doing approximately, we did 154 tracks on each machine, and a separate mixer system. Well, the mixer system can record, but at the same time, we use it as a live mixer at that point, something that could be built either as a very large aux session or as a very large audio track session, so that it can be used post the event for remixing, quick remixing, which I think you kind of had to do the next day.
We started mixing the next day, yeah, started editing and mixing.
So you recorded this all on your very large TDM system, which has many, many inputs. And then, Frank, you started mixing this on your recently...
my native system that I have in my home.
HD native system.
Yeah.
So
I took the 160 tracks and the hard drives and brought it to my native system that I have at home. I'm running on a 12-core Mac Pro that I bought about 5 months ago. Has 16 gigabytes of RAM and a Pro Tools HD native system with a native card. And even though I was running, had I been running a TDM system with the 192 voice count, I would have never been able to mix this project. But the native system, which allows me pretty much a 1-to-1 voice count per track, I was able to put all 106, I think we actually had 165 or 170 by the time we finished, because we had 154 mics, and then I had 10 on stage, and then we had 10 additional microphones out in the audience to pick up. So we pretty much put everybody's systems to the test on this. Amazingly enough, we had, I think, only one microphone down, and that was during the first half of the show. Someone had kicked out a flute microphone. But the other, everything else through that Maddie line, it was amazing because I know about 10 years earlier I'd done Elton John with the old F&L truck at the time. We had done One Night Only with Elton John in Madison Square Garden. And that show, we were 800 feet from the stage, but that was all run analog. And we had massive problems with hums and bumps and hisses and stuff because 800 feet of cable is 800 feet of cable, and in the analog world, that just asking for trouble. This, we were a quarter of a mile away, and in the Maddie world, we didn't have a single mic. The only mic that went down was one flute mic the first half, and that's only because someone had kicked out the mic input into the box, the mic box on stage. So remarkably, we got all 165 microphones into the truck without any issues at all.
And pretty remarkably, you're mixing all 165 tracks on
At
this
home
on your HD native system. And just maybe talk about what you've. I know Niko has also been using the native system. Just kind of maybe talk about the sonics of this 32-bit, floating point, architecture.
Well, two things. One, I'm probably the latest one here of all of those on the stage to come into the Pro Tools world. I was always known as a Steinberg Nuendo user, mainly because it was always my feeling that as much as I love the ergonomics of Pro Tools, and also just the fact that Pro Tools is a ubiquitous choice among audio professionals, but I was never totally happy with the mixing bus, and so I had found alternatives, and those alternatives were Nuendo, and I was doing almost all of my mixing on a Euphonics System 5 console. And it wasn't until I put in my room at home that I started investigating some of the more recent Pro Tools editions. And when Pro Tools 9 came along with the native card, I set that up at my home and was absolutely blown away by the sonic quality. For the first time I felt, and this is my own opinion, I don't want to, I don't want to say anything about anyone that loved Pro Tools in the past. You do great work, wonderful, I'm glad you loved it. But for me, I had an issue. And suddenly, with Pro Tools Native, I was absolutely blown away. It did everything and sounded just as good as anything I'd ever used before. I had compared it to some mixes I had done on my System 5 console. I also had just completed a Billy Joel final concert at Shea Stadium. He did a final concert where they closed down Shea Stadium. And that was, I think you guys also recorded that, right? And so I just finished mixing that, and I had done it in my a pre-9 system, which was a TDM system, and I simply brought my mix back on this new native system and played it through the native system, and I was just stunned by how much better to me it sounded. And since then, I've been an absolute advocate and devotee of Pro Tools and the new mixing engine that they have. I understand now that mixing engine now is in all versions of Pro Tools 10, and it's just remarkable. I think now, from my perspective, you now have the ability, all the wonderful advantages of Pro Tools, as well as the sonic advantages that you used to get from the other DAWs. They're now all rolled into one product. And this Bocelli and Central Park thing I'm really proud of, and pretty much everything I've done on the Pro Tools native system in the last 9 months I'm very proud of. So I think it's some of the best work I've ever done. So, and some of that goes to being an old guy who's done a lot of stuff, but some of it comes to the fact that I'm now working in a system that I feel absolutely confident with and feel can give me absolutely the best that I need to do.
Wow, thank you so much. So maybe Kevin, I know you haven't had the opportunity to work with this stuff yet, but I know you're a guy that transitioned from working traditional analog, mixing, and have moved into mixing in the box. And maybe talk about some of the stuff that you've done recently and kind of how you got to where you feel comfortable of working in the digital domain.
Well, in the digital realm, I've actually embraced the digital realm going back to about 1981 when I worked in Dublin at Wimmer Lane. We had brought in a 3M machine, and then we had an AMS audiophile workstation. And my boss at the time, Brian Masterson, who was a really great tracking engineer, kept telling all us young junior engineers, this is the way forward. Digital audio is going to be the way you're going to set out your career, and you should embrace it. So I was never really afraid of the digital environment. I always felt like, working in the analog world, I always felt constantly frustrated by getting a great sound coming off the floor and then listening to playback and going, well, it's not exactly what I want to get. It's a slight variation of what I wanted to hear, and it's musical and it's beautiful, but it's not what I really want to hear, which is coming on inline in the board. So. And then when you heard your mixes coming back off the 1/4 inch or the 1/2 inch machine, hearing that slight smearing and hearing the way in which the imaging shifted, and then you heard the mastering, and then you heard, God forbid, the pressing plant and what they would do to your mixes. And people always say, vinyl is wonderful. I can pretty much tell you that any engineer out there will say that what people hear on a vinyl record is not the record that those people made when they made those records. It's such a degradation of what you wanted to achieve. Then again, when digital first really came into the fore in the mid to late 80s with the advent of the CD, the first iterations were just harsh sounding. My first real experience of actually embracing Pro Tools was Sound Tools, which was the 2-track editor back in 1991, down in Looking Glass Studios down here on the Lower on Broadway, which is now unfortunately closed. And I used it just as an editor. And then slowly in the mid-90s, I moved into using Pro Tools for drum editing. And then I think by 1998, I did my first full record in Pro Tools, start to finish. I had 2 hot swap drives, 4 gigabyte drives. I did the whole record on 8 gigabytes. And the whole thing was done 14 songs on that at 48K. Then in early 2000, I started mixing in the box. Joel's previous boss, Randy Israeli, and I go way back to 1984 when I met him in Dublin. When he came over he brought his remote system to help record The Unforgettable Fire. And so he set up a studio in his house, and I've been working there. And the very first record I did was a record for Peter Gabriel's Real World label. And it was this old Irish singer, and he sung in Gaelic, and they wanted somebody to mix the songs that understood the language. And although I had been 25 years since I spoke the language, I was certainly familiar enough with the sound of it to know how to EQ that particular voice. And I sent the very first mix I did in the box up to Bob Ludwig. And at the time, Randy's room was very shallow, so there was a lot of bass buildup. And his response was, whatever you're doing, stay, don't touch a thing, it sounds beautiful. And I always subscribe to the point of view that I know Frank, obviously loved the way that Nuendo sounded. To me, it's not about what the gear is. It's really, the gear is a facilitator. At the end of the day, if you know what you want to hear and you know how to get from point A to point B, then ultimately you're going to get the right result. But speaking of how my workflow has changed, I now mix exclusively in the box. And ironically enough, I did a record this year where the artist wanted to go all analog, and I was mixing, thankfully there was a substantial budget, and so I mixed on the SSL up at Avatar Studio B. And when I set my first mix up to Ludwig to master, his first comment was, I really like what you do in the box better. And And that was kind of a bit of a shock. And I said, is it a level thing? Is it a warm thing? And he says, no, it's just, there's something about the digital compression that you've gotten used to using that is not inherent in this particular mix. I can actually hear the SSL compressor kick in, and it was hardly, the meter was hardly moving. So I modified it to readjust into the analog mixing world. And, once again, my firm belief that if you know what you want to hear, you'll ultimately prevail. But my workflow now is, like everybody else here on the panel, you have to embrace the technology. You can't let the technology rule what you do. I know with the new system you have the capacity for, is it over 500 tracks? Is that what you said?
Actually, with the HDX, we can go to 768 voiceable tracks.
See, for me, that's like a nightmare. I think if you can't mix it in that range, where you, as far as your arms expand.
Less is more. I think that's really more for our film people that need that, but 768 tracks on a music mix, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yet again, because having grown up with the experience of working in the analog domain where you actually had 16 tracks to work with, your production aesthetic was totally geared towards how do I make this arrangement work on 16 tracks? How do I make this arrangement work on 24 tracks? Having all that facility to put 700 plus tracks in doesn't make it a better arrangement. And in fact, when you inherit those projects and you come to mix those projects, it literally takes you hours to figure out where are all these parts coming in and why do all these parts need to be there. So even though it's a wonderful platform, people are forgetting the skill of actual arrangement and production aesthetic.
Well, that's a great point. So Niko, I'd like to, we were chatting a little bit before, and you were telling me a very interesting story about, recently you came onto an HD native system, and maybe talk about what we were talking about a little bit earlier here, how you did your little test.
First thing I do is turn off 792 of the tracks. Just absolutely.
Imagine also if they're labeled audio 1,
Oh yeah,
audio 2,
no.
audio 3.
Please, anybody out there that's an assistant, learn to type the instrument. Let us know what it is. I started, Frank and I go way back, and I was always analog. And I did the first digital record in '81, I think, with the 3M machine in LA. And we stared at it and went, it would be so great if that was all in a machine and on a hard drive, and eventually it was. But the real shift for me came because I was a diehard analog guy, and I still am up until it becomes a number. And then once your music is a number, I never leave the box. But I got very frustrated. I was mixing at Blackbird down in Nashville, and everybody was coming in, and everybody's trying to get me to use these summing buses, and you got to do this, and you got to do that, and I think it's all a bunch of bullshit. So what I did was I did a static mix, and I just measured the level of the bass, drums, 2 guitars, and a voice with echo at 12 o'clock. And I printed 10 seconds, the last 10 seconds of a verse and the first 10 seconds of the chorus. And I made one through a Neve a broadcast console, one through a 1608 API, one through the Dangerous 2, I think. I had a UA console that I owned. I went through that, and then I had a tube thing that I used, and then I did one all in the box. And I put it on a CD, and I gave one to George Massenberg, one to John McBride, one to Richard Dodd, who's my favorite mastering engineer, and the songwriter, Daryl Brown, and me. And I just said, take this, it's A, B, C, D, or E, tell me which one you like, and that's how we're going to mix. Everybody picked C, telling me it was me on a API, and it was all in the box. And I sold all my shit the next day. I said, I don't need this anymore. So, the proof for me is if you turn it up and you're grooving, you're grooving. And it doesn't really matter how you got there.
Well, that's great. So, I'd like to kind of, while you haven't had a chance to really, use Pro Tools 10, and I'm sure that, very soon you'll all be able to do that, and there's some wonderful new features here. But maybe just talk about, this is 20 years since Pro Tools came out, and we have a new platform here. Kind of, what do you see? Where do you see this technology going in terms of being able to help you do what you do, on a day-to-day basis? So, maybe Joel, you want to start?
Well, we do two things at our company, which one is live broadcast mixing for television, and the other is recording for remixing, which is what Frank did with Andrea Bocelli. The first thing is, that we have always embraced is workflow, is the ability to take a project through to the end without having to reinvent the project at every stop point, which used to be the case. You would take your tape off your tape machine, you would take it to another studio, and if the studio didn't have the SSL or something else that you were using, you were back to start again. You were EQing again. You were doing a number of things. Pro Tools has evolved as a workflow solution for us and for a number of people. Talent is talent, and these gentlemen have an extreme amount of talent to mix and do things that are consistent and musically pleasing. My job as an engineer, as a system designer, is to give them the tools so they don't have to think about it from point A to point B to point C to point D. Their talent can just completely take over and continue forward. And that's pretty much what Pro Tools has been to us. It's a wonderful platform that is a universal platform. It's not just he happens to have a native system and a D command. It's a guy who we're recording for that's taking it and mixing it on a 32-track session on an LE system in a hotel room at night so that he can provide a mix the next day for it to go on some broadcast media of some type. And that's where it's all become. It becomes a universal language that everyone can understand. And we've embraced it for a very long time. And I was very, very fortunate to have a mentor that Kevin was talking about, Randy Israti, who was, and I'll call him this, a pioneer in the remote facilities world. He's a guy who took and put digital consoles into his truck. He first put recalled SSLs in his trucks. Then he put Neve Capricorns in his trucks. And then we had this really bizarre idea that this product called D-Control came out. And we could put this in a Pro Tools system in a truck. And now it would reinvent itself all the time. When Pro Tools 7 came out, it reinvented itself. When Pro Tools 8 came out, it reinvented itself. When Pro Tools 9 came out, it reinvented itself. And now with 10, it's reinventing itself. And your actual investment is not being lost because after 7 years, someone's deciding they're not going to support a product anymore. That's what is the beauty here. And it allows that flexibility. And it allows that workflow. And the workflow is in this day and age, is everything that is going to matter, because when budgets are getting tighter and people are demanding things quicker, you have to be able to adhere to that. And you have to be able to give the people that can do it, again, these gentlemen to my right, my two partners, John Harris and Jay Vicari, who mix for Music Mix Mobile, you got to give them the right tools. And Pro Tools has always been the right tool for them to achieve what they need, either on a live broadcast or on a remix.
Let's go down the line, and then maybe we can open it up, for some questions from the audience as well too.
Not that this is a total Pro Tools love fest. I just have to say I do have one issue with Pro Tools in working in the truck, is that it won't do automation while it's an input, which means I do have to work around a little bit. So I don't want. It's an amazing project, not perfect, but amazing. But I just wanted to get an idea from the people here. How many people think analog is still really great? Okay, all right. I'm gonna, I'm probably gonna piss you off, but I'm gonna tell you that analog sucks. It really does. I've felt from the day I walked into the studio, I felt analog sucked. I don't understand the fascination with analog. What Kevin was saying before is something that bothered. The reason I went to digital early on, what really bothered me was I'd have a band out there kicking ass, and I'd be listening in my mix bus, and I'd hear this amazing thing with the snare kick and the kick and everything hitting me here, and then I'd play it back off the 24 track or something like that, and it was squishy and it was washy, and I lost all that dynamic, and I just said, I don't understand. Someone, please explain to me the fascination. It does some interesting things. There's some, sometimes it sounds, sometimes it sounds nice and sometimes it sounds awful, but you don't have really a whole lot of control over that. I started working in the digital world because I said, you know what? what's coming into that bus, that's what I want going to my storage medium. I don't want to have it come back and surprise me. If I need more bottom end, I'm going to add more bottom end. If I want to hear more reverb, or I want to hear more room, or I want to hear more top or bottom, I'm going to add that. I don't need some box to come back, and sometimes it sounds good and sometimes it doesn't. Now I've got a box here that when I record something now, when I used to record something analog, yeah, I like what it did to guitars. When I was doing Foreigner or Kiss or Korn or something like that, it's great to hear, a distorted guitar coming back off, +3 in the red and the whole thing coming off the analog. Yeah, that's kind of cool. But really, that's only signal processing. It's not doing, it's doing something, but that can all be emulated. So for me, it was, okay, I like what the guitars are coming off of that 2-inch tape, but I hate what the drums are doing. I hate the fact that the snare, the front end of the snare is gone, and the bass drum, the front end of the bass drum is gone. I hated all that. Well, now, with my Pro Tools rig and my system, I have a bunch of UAD cards, and I sit there. I can put an A800 on every track. And not only can I put it on every track, on the bass track, I can run the A800 at 15 IPS. And on the drum track, I can run it at 30 IPS. And I can use AGFA tape on the snare drum, and I can use 456 on the guitars. I've got 75 A800s in my studio. No studio can do that in the analog world. You can't not have the tape machine do what it does if you don't want it to. In my world, I can. Not only that, I can put an ATR on my mix, or I can put an A800 on my mix, or I don't have to have it at all. I can just go through an analog compressor or a digital compressor or do any of that stuff. And by the way, I hate to say this, and I know I'm dogmatic, but save your money on those analog summing buses. Look, if you do right what digital allows you to do, you don't need all this shit. All you need is a Pro Tools rig, a brain, and some ears. And you don't need, all this stuff is a lot of hype, I'm telling you. The thing is, and the first time I noticed that, this man right here, he's the one that turned me on to digital, because I'm telling you, I used to say digital sucks, like I'm saying analog sucks now, except now I've done them both, so I can tell you that. But I heard what this guy did on Peter Gabriel's So, and I said, wait a minute, digital can't suck. Maybe the people that are recording digital wrong are making it suck, but the concept of digital itself doesn't suck, because somebody did something amazing with it. I got my first, I won my first series of awards and stuff on a project that I did on a O2R in a house on Martha's Vineyard after working in the best studios in the world for 15 years. The bottom line is all it takes is the brain, and now you have, with Pro Tools 9, Pro Tools 10, all of this stuff, an incredible ability to record almost anything you want at the highest resolution and the best resolution ever. You don't need an 800 in the room. You don't need any of this analog gear. Robert's been in my house. He's seen my studio. I've got I've got a wall filled with Pultecs, with Neve preamps, with the whole deal. As Niko was saying, once I'm digital, I never go back. I'll go to the Pultec, the UAD Pultec, I'll go to something else, I'll do it all in the digital world, but trust me on this, you don't have to spend all this money now on this analog gear and all. The stuff that they're doing now with numbers is beyond belief. And people that start saying that digital isn't normal or natural, every time you go to a movie, you're looking at digital. Basically, every frame of those 24 frames is a sample. It's a sample of a moment in time, and they do it 24 times a second. And no one says, oh my God, that's not natural. The simple fact is you're doing with your eyes what we're now doing with our ears. It's just a question of how many times you go. And the bottom line is what we're doing now in the digital world so surpasses what we ever did in the analog world. And don't get me started on vinyl, because you got a rock going through a piece of plastic, shearing off shit every time it goes through it with more rumble and noise than God ever expected. and somehow this is supposed to be wonderful. I'm telling you right now, you have wonderful. You just got to do it right.
Thank you. So, so Kevin, Frank was talking about all these choices that we have now. But what's your feeling about these choices, and how do you? I kind of know a little bit because we've done some things before about how do you kind of work and kind of zero it in and kind of get to where you need to go without quickly without doing too much.
I actually, when I'm mixing in the box, I think I'm probably using no more than about 12 plugins. And what I decided way back when I was really investigating and trying to figure out, okay, there's certain aspects of the analog, mixing environment that I like. I like the speed in which you can reach and grab things. I like the flow, the ergonomics of the console. When I started working in Randy's room, we put in a D command. Actually, it was actually a Pro Control initially, and I thought, okay, this is a big glorified mouse. How can I adapt my workflow into the digital environment so that I'm controlling it and it's not controlling me? And so what I did was I started looking around. I started asking all my mastering engineer friends who I really respected. I thought, well, if you had to mix, or if you had to choose one piece of gear that you had to process through, what would that piece of gear be if it was a software version? And so I, collated a lot of choices from the various mastering engineers, and then I started purchasing them or just demoing them to see what they sounded like. So for what I do is I basically will just break my mix down into 3 separate components. I have a drum and percussion set, then I have a music set, which all the harmonic information goes in, and then I have a vocal set. And then on those 3 sets, I'll put the majority of my processing. So I'll do a little bit of EQ and a little bit of processing. And the EQs I'm using are mastering style EQs. And then that all gets summed to a final destination track within the session, and then my final bit of tweaking, a little bit of compression. Yet again, it's just gradual amounts of stuff. I can control the headroom. I get myself plenty of gain if I need it, depending on the project. But I look across the actual mixer, and maybe on 1 or 2 channels I have maybe a compressor or maybe an EQ if I'm trying to, EQ out some rumble or something like that, or take some pops. And the notion for me is I want to be able to move quickly. I want to be able to hear the genesis of the mix within a couple of hours. So I usually mix from the vocal down, because a lot of the artists I tend to work with are vocal intensive. So the very first fader I put up is the vocal, then I'll bring in the main harmonic element, then I'll bring in the rhythm stuff, and I just keep cycling around that way. But yet again, I'm hardly using any processing, but the quality of the processing I'm using is really what I aspire towards. And I find that, yet again, my mixes sound open, even though I can be using quite a bit of compression on certain genres of music if it's more like pop rock. But I'm not really trying to squeeze the last bit out of everything. And I find that a lot of times people, you get these sessions where the levels are just pinned, and then you've no headroom to work with, so then you have to work in reverse. So, I actually work very simply, because at the end of the day, it's not about trying to reinvent the wheel, and it's not about trying to make digital do something that doesn't naturally want to do. It's about making the music speak through the environment. And when you spend 30 years listening to the effect of, analog degradation, even though sometimes it's musical and pleasing, as I alluded to earlier on, the most frustrating part as an engineer was getting a great drum sound and then hearing that drum sound literally fade away in front of your ears over the duration of the project. And in fact, I don't know if anybody's ever seen that. It was a VH1 special, talking about great records in the past, and Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, and they were talking to Lindsey Buckingham about how they were, about 9 months into the project, and they were working on one of the songs one day, and they kept adding more EQ to the drum. They're working off of Slavery, and they're adding more EQ to the drums, and it just kept sounding worse and worse and worse. And then the engineer realized, oh, we have the original master back there. Let's put that up and see what it sounds like. And suddenly they were like, we don't need to use any of this EQ, because the tape has literally gone through the head so many times that it's like sheared off all the sound. And so that was the thing. You had to work quickly and efficiently in the analog world, and you better hope that your record was done in 3 months, because there wouldn't be any high end left on your record on the tape by the time you got to mix. So
So Niko, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this idea of, less is more, and I don't know your particular style, but maybe some things that you're currently working on in terms of, how your approach is with using, the HD native system.
Yeah, I'm not as technical as they are. I break my room up where I have what I call bookkeeping, which is the screen and the keyboard and the typewriter section, and that's over on the right. And in front of me, I have a console and the speakers. And one of the things you were asking about, what you can do to make Pro Tools better, try and figure out how to get as little time as you can doing what I call bookkeeping. So label the tracks and then get to the music. You should be spending all your time figuring out if you're singing in the right key, and if you're singing at the right tempo, and if you even dig the groove, and if you're in the room with the right people. The object is that this is supposed to be a playback medium that you can access fast. So if you have an idea, you can get the idea while you still have it, and it's still in your heart. It shouldn't really come from your head. It should go from your heart to your ears. And the good thing about the newer systems is that can happen quickly, and you can comp vocals quickly because you can break down all of the playlists. But for me, if somebody gives me something with 16 tracks of the same guitar part, I'll just close my eyes and I'll raise each fader one at a time until I find one that sounds like a guitar, and I'll mute the other 15. And I'll tell them thanks a lot, but that's what I'm doing. Because it's about what the cat played. It's not about how it's recorded. The least important thing is how I record something. The most important thing is if I recorded it when you were grooving. Because if that happens, it's always going to give you goosebumps, always. It's really not a question of did you use a low serial number 251. The question is, did you get it in record before he started playing? If you did that, you did the gig. And so the faster you can get any digital system to go into recording and reproducing with the least amount of bookkeeping and errors possible, the better off you are. This is about playing back feeling. It's not about really nicely aligned edit pages. Nobody gives a shit about that. I close my eyes when I listen to music. So that's really important.
I want to ask you a question about that, because it's funny nowadays, it seems like you and I were brought up, it was like you pressed the red record button, whether you were ready or not. I mean, it always ran. And now, you get 1,000 tracks on some of this stuff with useless garbage, but people have still this reticence. Oh, I'm not ready yet. What do you mean you're not ready yet? If there's signal coming through, you hit the record button.
If you're grooving, you're grooving.
Erase it.
You don't have to analyze it. Heidi will tell you. She and I did a record together about 3 years ago. She's an amazing assistant. She's hiding back there, and she's probably really embarrassed.
Heidi.
She assisted me. I did a record, and the first thing I told her when we got to Right Track, we were recording Neil Young, and he had just come off the road, and he's out of his mind. He's insane. And he really is an insane genius. He's everything you think he is. And I told him what the rule is you go into record, then you plug in the microphone. Because if a cat like that sees a microphone, he figures we're going. And he'll dump. It's there. And that one take goes by, and he's going to look at you, and you're going to say, oh, gosh, I didn't really have the levels. See ya. Next. Hit record, plug in the microphone in that order. And that's all that matters. The rest of what I do is all ordering food. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't. Just get the take. So the faster you can build your stuff to make that accessible for us, the better off we are. We all are, because we're going to get stuff that comes from our heart and not from our head. And that's what we need.
Well, I think with that, maybe, what we're going to do is kind of wrap this up. I know that there are probably a lot of people here that have got questions for all you guys, but, I think this is a party, so what we can do is, maybe allow everyone to kind of come up and, talk to everyone here individually. And I think you really hit it, it's about the heart, right? And we were wonderful. I want to just thank everyone here on the panel, and thank the folks at Tekserve. And, this is the 20th birthday of Pro Tools, but it also happens to be in synchronicity the birthday of Mr. Kevin Killen, although so I think we should really sing happy birthday to him. I mean, I know he's a little bit older than 20 years old, but he still's young at heart. So, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear Kevin, happy birthday to
Thank you. Actually, so I have a very funny story to tell you about this.
So thank you very much.
All right. So let me just finish this one quick story. So when I was, I've actually celebrated my birthday on 2 different days. The first 16 years of my life, I celebrated on October 21st. And then for the last, whatever, it's been the 22nd. And the reason I was one of 8 kids growing up in Dublin, and I was 6th in the family line. And I think I was 17, I was going to Europe, and I went to get my passport. And I went in to get a copy of my birth certificate. And I went into the Office of Public Records in Dublin, came out after being in there for an hour, and I opened up the envelope, and it says October 22nd. And I'm thinking, that's weird. They got it wrong. So I went back inside, and the woman said, okay, let me double check. And she went off, came back 10 minutes later, and she said, no, it's October 22nd. I said, it can't be. I've been celebrating my birthday. My whole existence is based on October 21st. So she went back in again. She came out with like the big dusty book, the music, then the name, Killen, Kevin, Damien, October 22nd. So I went home to my mom, and I went home to my house. And my other siblings were there, and I walk in, and it's lunchtime, and I said, check that out. My mom opens it up, and she looks at it, and she goes, oh my goodness. And my brothers and sisters said, what happened? And they said, oh my God, I've had his birthday wrong by a day. And so apparently she went into labor on the 21st, but I was born on the 22nd.
So when they say you don't look a day older, it really
don't
means
look a day
something
older
for you.
than it's true. So there you go. There you go. Here we go.
Let's give a big hand for our panel.